Yeah, great. Two great presentations, just wonderful, good solid information and within a fine theoretical context. But there was one thing that I think was missing in terms of the overall global context that the issue was being raised, and that is the boogeyman of automation that is not coming down the road, that is here. And I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on the relationship between the fact that there is going to be a massive displacement of workers globally because of automation and the introduction of the basic income idea as a method of social control, a method of social amelioration, or trying to keep the lid on the pot that's obviously going to boil over or going to have a fairly high boiling point.
Okay, Matthew. Is it Matthew? Yes.
Adam.
Adam, sorry, Adam.
Okay, so yeah, I think the presentations were really good. Actually, my question was pretty much taken in terms of automation. I'm on social assistance, I'm on ODSP. I've worked precarious jobs. For about 2 years I worked precarious jobs. I know the ins and outs. I know a lot of people who are stuck not only in precarious work, not only on social assistance, but a lot of people who would otherwise should be on disability, but absolutely cannot be. And it's not only because, you know, the stringent requirements or whatever for RDSP themselves, that you step into a hospital, and usually what happens if you talk about especially mental health issues and stuff like that is they just send you away. And so I think that, and it kind of gets into this point, I think that there's kind of this division between the working class and people on social assistance. It's welfare queenism, basically. I ask a lot of people, especially people in precarious work situations, what they think about people on social assistance, and pretty much 90% of the response from that is that, well, why the hell are they getting anything when I have to work my ass off in, you know, not only really precarious but also dangerous work that's not properly protected by government regulation most of the time, people who are injured on work, people who are trying to raise families on $12 an hour, right? This sort of thing. So there's definitely a conflict between working people and people on social assistance. And what I would like to see is a normalization of social assistance so that this is no longer, that the working class and people on social assistance can be regarded comprehensively as the proletariat. And it goes back to this automation thing, because we're going to get into a problem in the next couple of decades where right now being able to have a job, being able to have, especially a unionized job, you're already in a position of privilege. Increasingly, the actual proletariat, you know, you have a secure job, you have this, you have that, is a position that most people, you know, especially young people in the workforce, they're legitimately concerned about, and they're going to be removed from this position. They're going to be excluded from this in the future. So automation,
30 seconds.
Automation is going to be something that I think is going to be incredibly important to consider when we consider when we're having this discussion about. I think we have to redefine the proletariat first of all, and I think we have to actually consider the fact that work is not only going to be restricted in the future, but also this notion of why the hell is automation a problem? Why the hell is people not working a problem? I mean, I think personally, if we have robots who can do really like stupid work, we might as well go for it, right? I'm all for this. I'm all for this idealistic society in the future where people can be focused on metaphysics and philosophy and the sciences and the arts and stuff like that, while not having to worry about working fixing cars and lines at McDonald's and stuff like that. So I think that this is all stuff that has to be considered when we're having this discussion about a comprehensive, social assistance.
Great.
Thank you, brother. Douglas, in the back. Douglas.
I find this whole convention just remarkable because it's filling me in on a whole bunch of stuff that I was not aware of. For example, people a large number of people, a growing number of people becoming aware of the problem and acting to eliminate it. I'd just like to say back in 1983, I was a student at U of T, and I got a part-time job in a liquor store on DuPont Street near St. George. That's changed now. But you know, back then, I started at $15 an hour. That was the going rate in Ontario. And then what happened? The first free trade agreement, 1986. So Ontario took a big plunge, a couple million jobs lost, full-time jobs lost in this province, more than the rest of Canada. And then 8 years later, we had another free trade agreement. So the corporatists really, these are high examples, powerful examples of how the people in power are working against working class people. I mean, I get what you're saying about the government now trying to bamboozle us with this income stuff, but I really appreciate the speakers bringing our attention to the fact that they're screwing us. This is about them not paying and keeping more of the money for themselves and letting the rest of society just go to hell in a handbasket. But you know, this is so counterproductive even to them. I'd like to just say in conclusion, if they were, I heard that there's $600 billion on ice in the province of Ontario, and the people who have this money say they're not going to invest it right now because the marketplace is not dynamic enough. However, if we had $15 an hour rather than $40 an hour, this extra money would now be going into the marketplace. It would make the marketplace more dynamic. More people having money to spend in the marketplace would make people who own the marketplace actually wealthier. What's going on here? These people are not really clearly thinking about anything.
Thank you, Douglas. Okay, we got a long list of speakers. I'm going to take two more, come back to the panel, and then I will come back to the ones that are still on the list. So Barry, and then the brother here in red. And I will get back to the second one.
Thank you, and thank you, Jessica and John. I'm glad we're talking about the unicorn in the room. And this is a very instructive discussion, and I want to express my appreciation to you and the others working in the field as intensively as you are. Socialist Action is holding a convention in this room tomorrow for members and people who want to join, hint, hint. And we're going to vote on a position on this question, and your work has been instrumental in terms of informing us and giving us a direction that I think we may well adopt alongside you. We also have comrades and friends in this room right with us now who have come from a certain experience. There's a comrade here from Winnipeg. In Manitoba, there was an experiment with basic income not so long ago, and she may want to elaborate on what happened to that. There are comrades here from Quebec, where this was high on the agenda about a decade ago. What happened with that discussion? I think it's instructive. Now, back to the unicorn in the room. Context is everything. I mean, this is a working class organization. We're not a bunch of academics or intellectuals, but there's something to be said for context. And I think it's pretty clear that the context is austerity, and any proposal that comes from government, that comes from the ruling elite, that comes from think tanks full of Tories and Liberals, is going to be consistent with that logic. That's the only thing that makes sense. And it's verified by the experience we're seeing now. The Liberals have just put forward a plan called Changing Workplaces. And what's in it? Let's take just a quick look at that, because the Toronto Star lauds it as Liberals' plan first labor overhaul in years. I think it's more accurately described as an underhaul. So Changing Workplaces, it talks about a couple of worthwhile, I would say supportable reforms, but very limited. Card-based union certification, well, that would be a positive thing. Boosting vacation pay. Oh, it's so generous. This might be going overboard. 2 weeks to 3 weeks vacation pay. I think they better really watch the bottom line. And recognition that part-time work is regular and should be treated as regular, including the right to organize it. But what about banning scabs, replacement workers? No, that's not on. Because the minister says, well, that would be tilting the balance of power too much in favor of unions. Because we know how powerful unions are, right? They're really setting the agenda. And how many decades did it take to get this underhaul proposed, and how far-reaching is it? But what about the real answer to automation, the scourge of automation? And the answer, of course, is to share the available work. Let's put robots to work to
30
replace
seconds.
the drudgery and the unsafe work, and then distribute the available work to those who need it without a cut in pay or benefits. And that requires a planned economy. That requires a different social dispensation where everyone has their needs met and they contribute to their ability for the greater good. And that's something that only socialism can bring about. Thanks.
Thank you. And red shirt.
Do I get a
Yes, you do,
a
brother.
microphone? Okay. Well, I am in despair about the whole BA, basic income debate. I wasn't that been an advocate for the whole thing for about 40 years, and I'm wondering where in the hell it all went to. We once thought we had this negative income tax crap buried, and we could discuss better options. And all interesting to die in the 1980s. And then we got this Philippe Van Parijs basic income Europe network nonsense. And now we've got all this, we've got the negative income tax back again in another name. People who know nothing, been involved, some of them for maybe 10 years at the best, suddenly think they're experts about it. There's this very little of the old guard left, like me and maybe Robin in Toronto, and across Canada there's Cynthia and company in Victoria, maybe some of the people from Quebec, but they don't like communicating with us English people. Otherwise, it's just this NIT garbage. For example, the Demogrant idea seems completely buried. That is actually the most efficient way to get granted BI to everybody would be to extend the guaranteed annual income we have now from senior citizens to everybody. Right. And we're quite aware that to do this would require a massive social movement, a huge struggle. We're not in any delusions it's going to happen anytime. It's going to happen very easily. It needs a very powerful social movement. The left should be on this. Instead, you got all these blockheads talking about make more good jobs. Well, one person has at least one good idea, which is sharply reduce the working day. That would help an awful lot. So there's some progress. Some people at least have some idea about the modern world. So my question is just how about we can start talking about not the unicorn, but real other possibilities of how to do a basic income. And, that's what I'm trying to do so far, and that's not too much luck. But anyway, that's my spiel.
Okay, before I go back to the panel, I want to remind everyone here, we all talk issues, but I'll have nothing said. I won't tolerate anything said here that borders on racism. Okay? So that's that. I hope I won't have to repeat myself. So we're going to go back to the panel, and we'll start with John, and then Jessica, up to 5 minutes for now.
Okay. There was a lot of questions with a lot of implications, so I'll just go for my 5 and then stop when I have to. First of all, the adequacy of the payment that is being received on the pilot project is, with all of the qualifications that Jessica made about what people are losing, is significantly greater. It's an indication of how wretched social assistance payments are, that a single person on Ontario Works going up to the 75% of the low income measure that they're talking about would see a significant increase in their income. But what is happening in the pilot and what would happen in a truly provincial-wide system are two entirely different questions. We simply don't know. We can't assume that what people get in the pilot that everyone would get in the future. Let me try and focus a little bit on the automation question. It's absolutely right that it's only a profit-driven system where the question of technological displacement is an issue. Automation would actually be a good thing in a society that was rational and just. It would simply mean that people didn't have to work as long and people could live their lives and participate in the running of society. What I reject, however, is the notion that basic income can be a way to create a kind of a post-capitalist capitalism. That we can prepare for a workless future. Elon Musk from Tesla Motors is the big one on that. He just got dinged for not paying workers for their meal breaks, incidentally. That's right. But this visionary man suggests that basic income will be the solution because his robots will be so productive that out of their bounty, people will be able to. What I don't understand is why he gets to keep the bloody robots. So the truth is that I don't think we can expect that people who are building pipelines while they poison the planet are going to provide a realistic, rational, sensible way to deal with technological displacement. Under capitalism, capitalists compete with each other. They use technological displacement to reduce costs and to increase the rate of exploitation of the workers that they keep. And that will continue to be a feature of capitalism. And automation remains for workers, as it's always been, and increasingly so, a huge problem. We have to put forward transitional demands around the reduction of the working day and the sharing of these things. We have to fight to stop people being displaced, and we have to fight for compensation in those situations. But ultimately, the only way we're going to utilise the technological resources that are available to us is going to be to get rid of capitalism. And we have to fight back. We have to fight back to the best of our ability in the interim. I just want to also perhaps address the stigma that was referred to that people on social assistance face. It's a massive question. It's been deliberately put in place. It goes all the way back to the poor laws. And the notion of creating pariahs out of people on social assistance is something that's been deeply, deeply ingrained in this society for a very long period of time. And the fight for working class unity, because we are indeed all part of the working class, is a really important priority. And our demands that we put on the system of social assistance have to focus on full entitlement, income adequacy, and the end to the disgusting intrusions and moral policing that are built into the system. I just want to finally say that the pilots that people point to are, in my opinion, not really, they don't tell us much about basic income. To test basic income, you have to test the effects of implementing that kind of a model on a society. What they're doing with the pilots is not really testing basic income, they're testing poor people. They're taking small groups of poor people and they're providing them with a bit more resources to see whether they spend it on the demon drink or whether they move to the suburbs and have 2.3 children or something. And those moral assumptions are built right into the thing. There's no doubt that people who receive the extra money on the pilot project are going to be better off than they were when they were poorer. But there's no need to study anything, which is exactly why we say give it to everyone. Everyone on social assistance should get what they're getting on the pilot project right now, and the minimum wage should go up to $15 an hour so that low-wage workers receive decent wages and not top-ups out of the general tax revenues.
So I'll start with this question about, is the basic income actually more? And the answer is, it depends, right? It depends on who you are and it depends on the circumstances. The bottom line is, does it put more money into the pockets of some people who right now are living on next to nothing? Yes. But again, it's an incredibly small group of people, and John is bang on. At the end of the day, this is being done so that they can pilot, test poor people. But it's really important to me that we also draw attention to the fact that part of this group of people is a control group that in fact will not receive even another cent, but will be expected to go undergo all the monitoring that's necessary to be part of this program. So, so that they can test, because apparently we don't already understand that putting more money in the pockets of the people who need it is going to make their lives better. Apparently that's something that the government of Ontario needs to study, because it's not clear already to them. So what I would say is the devil is in the details, and so anybody who, including people who are supporters of the basic income, I think need to take a very serious look at the individual details. In terms of this, John's already said, and actually a lot of people from the audience brought up, in terms of the automation, we need to be real that one, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly all the jobs have gone to robots, right? It doesn't work that way. There's going to need to be a transition during this process, and there are a whole lot of things that can be done during that transition. One is absolutely the shortening of the workday, right? And we're seeing this I think done successfully in some other countries. But another thing is the reality of how can we be living in a world where supposedly there's no work, but then there are also people working 2, 3, and 4 part-time jobs. Yeah. How does this work? And it comes down to we are not expecting employers, we no longer expect employers to abide by a contract that says one of your jobs as an employer is to make sure that your employees can live. Right? That basic concept has disappeared. And so instead what we're talking about is somebody having to piece together 2 or 3 or 4 part-time jobs. Imagine if each of those part-time jobs, the fact that it's part-time isn't the part that concerns me, the fact that it's not a living job is the part that concerns me. Imagine if each of those 2 or 3 or 4 part-time jobs all paid a living wage and all went to different people, and suddenly this disaster that we're supposedly facing down isn't nearly the same disaster, right? But what we're talking about is, or what they're attempting to do, is to suggest that basic income can be used as a way to prop up a failing system, right? And at the end of the day, basic income and capitalism just aren't compatible. They aren't. It's being used as a way to prop up a system that's failing. What I do want to take a quick moment to do is talk about the Changing Workplaces review, because I really do think that's important. For anybody who's actively been working on the Changing Workplaces review, we know that one of the things that the government always says is, oh, well, when we're doing reviews like this, we need to make sure that the results, or we need to make sure that what comes out is fair to people and to businesses. And the question also, to me automatically becomes, well, why? Businesses didn't elect you, right? People did. And so if you've got a mass movement like something like 15 in Fairness that actually has done some really great work, and so there are some recommendations that are coming out, but you need to recognize that the balance of that force that's being put on, and that pressure that's being put on the government of Ontario, absolutely is employers coming to the table and saying, so currently under Ontario Labour law, it's 10 unpaid emergency days available to workers. And employers were actually coming to the table and crying that that was too much, 10 unpaid days, and that they needed to see restrictions on those days. So that's anytime the government opens up something for consultation or opens up something for study, what they're in part doing, and this is actually blows my mind as well, when they first got massive feedback on the Changing Workplaces review, the feedback came overwhelmingly from community-based groups, not from businesses at first, because businesses didn't catch on that there was a real possibility for a movement here. And the government actually said, oh, we're going to actually look at extending the consultation period because we want to make sure that businesses have a fair opportunity to have their say. So this is the kind of system that's being set up when we look at things like the change. So I don't want to knock any wins that come out of the Changing Workplaces review that are true wins for workers, are meaningful, they have been fought for, and they have been won by campaigns like Raise the Rates, campaigns like 15 in Fairness. But we need to recognize that every single time the government takes on those kinds of consultations, what they're doing at the same time is saying, hey, business, come tell us what you want, right? Because we're gonna make sure that what you need is in there as well. And so we don't have, as a movement, as a people, we don't have the money that businesses have to launch those sorts of, I mean, they launched this absolutely absurd Keep Ontario Working counter campaign, which needless to say has nowhere near the traction that 15 in Fairness has. When they launch with money, and we need to fight back, we need to launch back with people.
Okay, folks, back to you. I have five speakers on the list, and the first speaker will be Sister Earl Eyre, and then Yazin, Sunny, John, and Felipe. So,
Thank you very much. I think my question and comment is directed particularly to John. I feel that basically it seems to me what it boils down to, it's not really complicated. It's a question of rights and human rights. And I think if we look at things that way, we don't have to get hung up in how much he or she or they are getting. It's a question of what we need to live as human beings. Maybe I'll leave it at that, but I would like John particularly, maybe both of you, to comment on that, because we have not a sane society and not a just society, but an insane society. And I think we need one which is much more based on simple logic of being a human. And I particularly think I'm involved very much in the work for peace. That's what I do with most of my time. And when you think of the just absolutely ghastly conditions in which most of the children of the world live, probably something like 92% have a very slim hope of even surviving. And these are the things that we need to think about. So let's consider what we need for a just society, not just particularly ours, but also on a global scale. Thank you very much.
thank you. Yazin?
Thank you very much. As Barry said, tomorrow members and supporters of Socialist Action will meet in this room for this convention, and a policy proposal that we will be discussing about will be on basic income. And in that proposal, we make an observation that there's a buy-in from the left. And unfortunately, this basic income idea is a diversion from more important struggles such as raising the minimum wage, raising the welfare rates, expanding healthcare, free transit, elimination of tuition, socialized programs to end housing crisis. So I think our policy line is in line with what Jessica and John have presented today. Regardless of what we think about the necessity of this discussion on basic income, it will come. We will be asked what we think about this. And I think in the discussions with our neighbors, with our colleagues, we should remind them that there are three important questions related to basic income. The first question is, will this basic income program will really leave the people, the beneficiaries of this program, about the line of poverty? Will this really work? That's the question that we should ask. And secondly, will the government protect the public services? Really? I mean, that's a question. Second question we should ask. And the third, what will happen to the wage level? What will happen to the job quality? So poverty, wage, services, these three questions are tied to the question of basic income. And lastly, by the way, for the record, my name is Mike White and I work for the Ministry of Labor. And the Ministry of Labor is leading this changing workplace review thing. And again, for the record, my name is Mike. This is not a confidential information after all, but they were planning to release the report mid-May, and I think they will postpone again the release of that report just because, just as Jessica said, they're concerned about the stakeholder reaction to it. And when you hear the word stakeholder, it's most of the time not the people but the business. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Okay, Sunny.
Yeah, you can call me Al. I'm already, well, alcoholic Al. You can I more or less agree with you, so I'm going to try to take a counterintuitive argument that maybe because the NDP were talking about a $15 minimum wage and providing prescription care or pharmacare to all ages, that the Liberals had to bring out these things and add on the 0 to 24 drug coverage, even though they're probably covered by their parents, or if they're low income, the program. So When I went to school, business school, in economics, they considered 7% unemployment full unemployment, so that people would be training. Maybe they didn't have the language skills and so forth. They're in school, and an earlier discussion was that anywhere from 200,000 to 300,000 temporary foreign workers or migrant workers already work in Canada and Ontario, around the Niagara region, I suppose, for the season. And if they're willing to do work that other people aren't, then what case can be made? If the Liberals are trying to just use, let's say, Thunder Bay and Hamilton as examples, that's not really a good comparison given the cost of living in Toronto. So if I was a Liberal, I would argue that Mike Harris is to blame for cutting the rates, and the minimum wage was $6.85 for 9 years until the Liberals came along and sort of boosted it up and then eventually indexed it to inflation. So they would probably argue, what's the Conservatives under that new guy Brown, Patrick, what's he going to do? He has no program. Like that's the way they're going to come at this. So if they can argue that the case study of Dolphin, Manitoba improved the lives of the people that participated, like they didn't go to the doctor as much, they weren't as depressed, they felt better about themselves and had a better situation for the Conservatives, took away the program. Why can't we just test out this program, see how it works in the time being?
Okay, thank you. John Hall?
So I just noticed actually that we need to work a little bit on our gender balance here for folks who want to speak on the mic. About a third of us here are women, so I'd like to hear from some sisters.
Thanks, Julius. And I hope somebody, a woman, does put up their hand right now. I'd like to say, first of all, I agree with 95% of all the warnings and admonitions that our speakers have given us, but I do have one problem. I'm a socialist, and I have this idea that no matter if you're out of work, you're unable to work, no matter where you are, where you live, that you should have a guaranteed income, that the state should supply you with a guaranteed income. And I really don't care if Milton Friedman thought this up in a different way or Davos talked about it. I don't care. I've had this idea for a long time. It was not my idea, but I do believe that, and most socialists believe in a guaranteed income for people who are incapable of working or have other problems. So I just have this problem to say, well, we're against a guaranteed income. But everything is, like Barry said, is context. And we're talking about the guaranteed income pilot project put forward by the Liberals to kick the problem down the hall for another 3 years. So we're not for that. And your admonitions are very correct. I'll reiterate a few of them just to show I understand them. Basic income could replace all the other supports, or could monetize. You give people a lot of money, you're going to monetize the services, then you monetize the services and you're going to have cuts to them, or they're going to be privatized. This is all right. The effect on the minimum wage, I'm not sure how that could be. If we're subsidizing low-income workers' wages and employers, yes, minimum wage could go down, but minimum wage could go up if people stay at home and don't have to take a job. So that argument is unclear. Most importantly, as social activists, you're 100% correct. We're not going to put all our eggs in one basket and start fighting for this neoliberal version of basic income. We got to fight for a minimum wage, good welfare rates, and labor laws and anti-scab laws. But there is an idea of a progressive guaranteed income, and there is a context to it. And that context right now is that Guy Caron is running in the NDP, and one of his platforms is a guaranteed income. And he's saying that it's going to be big. It's going to be $24,000 for somebody who lives in Toronto. And it's going to be, if you live in a big city, it'll be more than other places. He's not going to have any drops in services. And it could bring 5 million or more people out of poverty, this guaranteed income. How do you vote against that? So there is a context of progressive people bringing forward an idea, and we're going to have to decide whether are we really for that, are against that? Or would we be in Parliament, our NDP caucus, saying we're not going to vote for a bill that says we're going to raise a guaranteed income rate and raise 4 or 5 million people out of poverty immediately? So I understand your warnings, and you're entirely correct, but there is a context of a progressive basic income that is being put forward. So, and we're going to have a big discussion on that tomorrow.
So in other words, if you don't want to hear it, you all have to join.
And Carol put her hand up as well.
Okay, so we'll go to the sister here, then to Felipe, and then to the other sister.
Sorry, you made some really good points. I just also wanted to point out that $24,000 is currently today's minimum wage at $11 an hour, and that's not really a living wage either. And so if we have an NDP leader who's forwarding or tabling something that is a universal income, it needs to be higher than $24,000. It needs to be probably at least $30 for it to be a living wage.
Thank you, Jackie. So we're going to come to Felipe and then Carol.
I think it was Barry who said the first one to say that this thing has to be put into context. Context is not just Canada, it's the globe, because we have a totally global supply chain economy, and also a global war economy, and also a global imperialist system, which doesn't guarantee anything to most people on the planet, except misery. So that's the first thing we should think about. The second thing is that I think the guaranteed basic income is not a new idea. First of all, the capitalist class already have it. They have a guaranteed maximum and minimum income. It's the same thing, right? Secondly, the United States subsidizes tens of thousands of farmers not to produce anything, right? Why? Because if they produce at their capacity, the cost of agricultural products internationally would drop towards zero. And there would be an elimination of the law of value and profit making in the agricultural sector. They cannot permit that. So that's a guaranteed basic income for the farmers involved in the United States at the expense of peasants and farmers everywhere else in the world. So let's remember that. Thirdly, I think, and I hope this is not a side issue, the whole business of robotization is a myth. What has happened is that the industrial jobs, the hard labor, has been shifted to the third world. In China, we now have the largest proletariat in history, most of it in the so-called third world, the so-called developing world, which is really the de-developed world that's going downhill fast, except China, because it has a symbiotic relationship to the US economy. That's the only reason China is not like India or not like some places where things are even worse. So robotization, if we had a socialist society, we would already be fully robotized. The crisis of capitalism means they are not taking advantage of the actual technological and scientific advances that are already available to us. Capitalism stalls robotization. It's not speeding it up. If we had a socialist system, it would be going like a rocket into space. But why? This is something that Marx pointed out as early as his time, that the utilization of technology slows down over time. The only reason it increases, apparently, and it's a myth or a false vision, is that under the whip of competition, one capitalist sector has to undercut the other. So you get this leapfrogging, running ahead of each other. But it's irrational utilization of technology because its sole purpose is to increase profit, which is also the sole purpose of capitalist production. Capitalist production is not to satisfy human needs, it's to produce surplus value,
30 seconds.
which is then converted into money or gold or futures. And futures are a claim on future labor. Let's remember that too.
Just pass it to Carol, right beside you. Pass it to Carol.
Carol, right there.
I didn't see you.
Okay, sister.
I think we'd all agree there's two versions of reality. There's the real version and there's what the official version. Not the same. Unfortunately, most of the people I run into as I go out and about my day-to-day businesses, they only know about the official version. They don't have a clue about the other.
Yeah.
So I get these people will make these really irritating comments, to me they're irritating, or ask these questions and I don't even know where to start sometimes. I mean, like, have you got 20 years? But one of the comments I'll get related to this, there's two. People have this problem about laziness. You know, that's probably, and we've all sort of been brainwashed about that. There's nothing worse than laziness, and he who does not work will not eat, and all that kind of thing. But the other comment that comes out a lot, when you mention anything like this, the idea of people not having to work for every little for everything. There's also the minimum wage problem. They'll say, well, yes, but you know, a lot of employers can't afford to pay $15 an hour, and if you put that on, then there'll be no jobs at all. It's that kind of thing. You know, there's maybe the small business person, or I don't even know who's in that situation. But I'd like to have some answers sometimes. If anyone has any ideas about this, I appreciate it.
Bravo.
Thank you, sister. Okay, brother?
Bravo.
Yeah, I rather think John did hit on the context under your breath. Can't hear it? I'm sorry. Yeah, John hit on the context, the two contexts under his breath, which is, you know, got to get rid of capitalism. There is no advancement anywhere without us shucking the language and the concepts that we all work with. I don't know how this concept of universal adequate income ever got distorted down into basic income again, where it's just usurped by the very system that we know usurps everything. And why are we discussing their agenda? And I'm very unclear as to whether we're even thinking of adequate income. And income, how did that ever come to be clearly a monetary situation again? The money is an abstraction, a total abstraction, which doesn't exist at all, and it's a filter between our physical realities in this world and basic means of control. It assures that on the other end of money, the privileged continue their privileges, period. So, I don't know, I guess that's it. I'm questioning what are we actually thinking here, and yes, I'm all for adequate universal income, period. Always has been. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, brother. Okay, we have room for a couple of more speakers, just two more.
It's a very interesting talk about the universal income, which I believe can only come about with that poster there where it says nationalize the big oil, because all the profits go there, and they keep the profits. They don't distribute or keep you on a fish hook for a little bit of money. The big oil and also nationalize the big oil and the banks. So if you nationalize the banks, then when you do that, it's like the people own it, and they're not going to charge exorbitant interest rates on goods, and also for the consumer. Then you have more equity, or more less cost, less gentrification, less concern about, like, I can't pay the debt off, which of course the corporations use. Oh, we can't pay the debt. ever, so we have to put more taxes, we have to put austerity measures on the public. But if you nationalize the big oil, okay, and the big banks, that means there's no debt to private corporations and interests, so that we could have a more equitable society that is not afraid of losing their homes because they have to pay the interest on the debt to a bank or debts to the oil company. So I think that last section there, nationalize the banks and big oil, would help spread money around the community.
Yes.
Thank you. So Robbie, and then John W. right here. John, one minute.
This has tended to be, I guess necessarily so, an Ontario-centric discussion, and that's fine. But I think we need to keep in mind that it's a very uneven situation with respect to this issue across Canada and even internationally. However, I think I just put in a word about the history of this debate in Quebec, because there was a certain amount of interest in this about 10 or 12 years ago at the time of on the left, at the time of the formation of Quebec Solidaire. And it's notable that the late Michel Chartrand, who's a veteran trade union leader in Quebec, was a partisan of basic income and devoted the last few years of his life to campaigning for it, at least in the hallways of left-wing discourse. So it's kind of faded from the view since then. I think there's a number of reasons for that, but it could come back. I don't think Quebec Solidaire would be immune to the temptation of a basic income strategy, and perhaps not even the PQ. But at the moment, it doesn't seem to be on the agenda of the business class. I think the baton has really passed to the struggle to raise the minimum wage, $15 an hour, and fairness. That's a fairly major campaign underway in Quebec as well as elsewhere. Thanks.
Okay, just give it to John, right?
My apologies, brother and sisters, for missing earlier. I did see you the other day when you were being harangued by Avi. So my question arises out of that. I completely endorse your position on the class nature of what the Liberals might do, and it's an absolute mistake to support that as a tactic. That being said, when I used to visit my father when I was in early university in Winnipeg, he was a banker, but I used to walk by the offices of Mincome, which was then in process in Manitoba, and since then there's been some evidence. So how do we oppose this right-wing neoliberal basic living income to offload and follow that libertarian agenda, at the same time put forward a call that somehow unifies progressives and the left around entitlement for basic human dignity, which is income, education, a roof over your head, and springboard off the failures that Wynne is undoubtedly going to demonstrate, and put forward a unifying class-based agenda that we can organize around.
Okay, thank you, John. So we're going to turn it back to the panel. Jessica will go first, and then John, and they have up to 10 minutes each.
Okay, lots of different concepts, lots of different things to respond to. I like, Yasin, the sort of questions that you laid out, because I think that is really important. I think that progressive groups, left groups people are gonna come to groups and they're gonna say, do you support basic income? And there needs to be some sort of means by which, because this question is gonna keep coming up and people are gonna keep saying, there needs to be some sort of other. And the reality is that, this group is already coming from it from the socialist perspective of if we had true wealth distribution, then this wouldn't even have to be a discussion. This would be part of that process. But as always, and I'm going to come back to it, and I know I sound like a broken record, no system of basic income as it's currently being proposed can be seriously looked at without looking at the context of what it's being applied to. Basic income is not going to be implemented in a vacuum. It's going to be implemented in the reality of the capitalist system that we currently live in. It's going to be implemented in the reality of the political system that we currently exist under. And that really is true whether we're talking about the Liberals or, brother, I absolutely take your point. For example, that Guy Caron is, as one of the candidates for the NDP leadership, is talking about a basic income. And I met Guy was part of the same panel that, and the question that I have for Guy that, in hindsight I wish I'd had, is that so far Guy is talking about a much more radical true income than what is, for example, being proposed by the current Liberals in Ontario. But he's not talking about how exactly he's going to make that happen. He isn't, for example, as far as I know, talking about a massive process of nationalization of a production in the country, as our sister brought up. I don't want to get into this game where we talk about, well, a true income is going to require massive, it's going to require massive amounts of wealth, but that is the reality, right? And if we're going to do that, then what we're talking about is really completely replacing capitalism, which this isn't me, obviously not me speaking against, but that's the truth. So I mean, somebody to me like Guy Caron needs to come out and say if he is truly in favor of a massive national redistribution of wealth, then that's the language that he should use. Because without looking at the reality of where those funds are going to come from, and then we get into the other reality, which is somebody who is going to speak openly for massive redistribution of wealth going to be elected under our current political system? And the answer is no, right? Unfortunately, the answer is no. So I understand that somebody like Guy Caron needs to play that middle ground where he's, doing his best to speak to both sides of that table, but I don't see where in his plan he actually funds, and I agree with the sister, by the way, even a $24,000 basic income is not a true basic income, but it also comes down to we aren't going to, if we are going to actually seize the methods of production, if we are actually going to go in and get access to these funds, it's not going to be done quietly through a democratic process. It's going to be done through revolution, right? I'm not saying anything remarkable here, especially to this particular group of people. And so that's the piece that gets missing, I think, from that conversation, that if we want the reality of a true universal, that nobody goes without the basic fundamental, and this is the human rights piece that my other sister brought up, that if we're going to put that system in place, it can't be put in place on top of or supplementary to the current capitalist system that we have, and that's the only type of basic income that I can see either from the right or from the left that's actually being proposed at this moment in time from people who are really in those positions of power. And so that's where we come back to, and I really like the phrase that the brother used, that part of why this probably dropped off the question or dropped off the table in Quebec is because it wasn't on the agenda of the business class. We need to be conscious of the fact that the types of basic income that are being proposed right now, if they are supported by or on the agenda of the business class, then we should be terrified by that. Right? We should be absolutely terrified by where that is coming from. And so, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but basic income will not be implemented in a vacuum. It would be implemented under the current capitalist and democratic system that we have, and the system that we have that is set up is not set up in a way that is ever going to allow a truly humane universal basic income. It's going to allow a propping up and subsidizing of a system that's not working. And so at the end of the day, that to me is why basic income is a unicorn. There's no way to turn it into a horse. There's no way to turn it into something real under the system that we exist in. We would need to completely overhaul the system So we're putting the cart before the horse, we're putting the unicorn before the, the cart before the unicorn. And so that, at the end of the day, is why I think it's extremely dangerous for the left to promote basic income in the reality of the world that we live in right now.
I remember a few months ago I was speaking at an event we're dealing with basic income, and I made the point that there's no question to throw out the concept that everyone can have an income that they could live on decently as a matter of right is an alluring idea. In fact, opposing the idea of basic income, I said at the time, is a bit like explaining all the sensible reasons why you shouldn't get a puppy. Because it seems on the face of it so nice. But let me say that I think we should all, as socialists, as activists, as people who fight as part of the working class movement, we should all have a perspective of demanding, not in the socialist future, but right now under capitalism, that everyone have the right to a decent income that they can live decently on. Yeah. If that comes from an income support program, okay, and it should come from wages as well. Everyone should have decent income and decent wages. No one disputes that. In that sense, we all agree with the idea of a basic income. But the problem with all of the progressive notions that are put forward, there's a number of them. And they do, I'm afraid, all buy into this notion that you don't place the onus on employers to pay decent wages, but you top them up. That's the reality. Guy Caron is very big on the fact that the most people who would receive the benefits of his system would be people who work for low wages. They would be topped up out of the general tax revenues. In effect, instead of the workers being paid by their employers, they'd be paid by other workers, right? That's the goal. John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, in putting forward his vision of basic income, makes clear that he sees it as a way to protect people from the realities of low-paid, precarious work. Again, the same notion that workers are going to pay for other workers' wages. And I think it's a fundamental miscalculation. And I think it's wrong, and I think it is a loss of confidence and a loss of vision that underlies that very conservative perspective, that neoliberalism has won, that living wages are not an option, therefore we're going to look for a social policy end run around it. It's unfortunate because, first of all, it's deeply conservative, and secondly, it's not going to work. The neoliberal reality of exploitation is not going to go away just because they put the name basic income up in front of the door. It's going to remain part of what's going on, and in the end, I think that the progressive basic income, for all its radical ideas, in fact, is quite a conservative notion. There's this character in Louisiana by the name of Scott Santens, who's just one of the sort of the gurus of the basic income movement, and he sent me an offensive tweet the other day, in which he said to me, because I was condemning the notion of basic income, and his response was, "It's too bad you can't go back to the 19th century to oppose the abolition of slavery." Which I thought was offensive on so many levels. And as a matter of fact, in my tweet, I said, what does somebody who writes for the people in Davos know about emancipation? But I mean, this notion that what you're going to do is to provide a payment, and then it buys in so much to the neoliberal marketplace concept of the future. It reconciles itself to neo-capitalism so fundamentally. So much more should we put ourselves into fighting for decent, free, accessible public services. So much more should we be pressing for nationalisation. So much more should we actually be taking up the fight for real, tangible, concrete campaigns and things we can win ground on. In reality, all the people who advance the notion of basic income, in the end, are looking to cut a deal with the system. Guy Standing of the Basic Income Earth Network, he flies to Davos. He writes articles for The Economist. He's become the bono of basic income, and that, I'm afraid, is where it leads. That's the logic of that position. We fight for what we can under capitalism. We're socialists. We fight for the end of capitalism, and we don't believe there are panaceas. There are only struggles.